I again am John Kostiak, Executive Director of the National Whistleblower Center, and your co-host, along with the Center's board chair, FBI whistleblower Jane Turner. Thanks, Jane, for all you have done in police reform and all you continue to do for whistleblowers.
Thank you, John.
Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. Those are the words of Representative John Lewis speaking atop the Edmund Pettus Bridge just a few months before he passed. I could not think of a better way to open up today's conference. Our conference focuses on how whistleblowers are helping the world by getting into good trouble, necessary trouble. Everyone knows that whistleblowers get into trouble. When you expose corruption by powerful people, attempts at retaliation and intimidation will almost surely follow. What I would like to emphasize today is the good and necessary part of Mr. Lewis's injunction. Good trouble, to me, means trouble through nonviolence. Gandhi, Mandela, King, and Lewis have all shown us this is not just about de-escalating violence. The affirmative practice of nonviolence is incredibly powerful and effective. So what does John Lewis mean when he says get into necessary trouble? In my view, that means addressing serious wrongdoing, wrongdoing that simply cannot and must not be tolerated in a civilized society. In a civilized society, a white police officer would not feel so protected by institutional racism that he can murder a black man with his knee on the man's neck for over 8 minutes in front of witnesses and expect no consequences. In a civilized society, large companies would not send their workers to tend to those sick and dying from COVID-19 or those providing other essential services and not take the simple steps to protect them from a disease. And no one would use COVID funds to buy a Lamborghini sports car. A civilized society would not allow one community after another to be destroyed by wildfires and floods intensified by climate change, and not hold accountable those who illegally conceal the climate change threat just so they can make more money. Whistleblowers cause good trouble because they know it's necessary trouble to fix these and other grave injustices. I am so excited about the many excellent speakers who have come together today for today's conference, including whistleblowers, key leaders from the federal executive branch and beyond. I would like to acknowledge in particular Steve Cohen, NWC's co-founder and board chair, who will be on our final panel. And I would like to especially give mention to our two keynote speakers, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, the tireless champion of whistleblowers, who has been our leader in Congress for over 3 decades, and who is rolling out an important new initiative today. California Representative Jackie Speier, who is leading efforts in the House to better protect COVID-19 whistleblowers. I would now like to turn over the microphone to Jane Turner, who will give us a few opening thoughts and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, John. Thank you to the National Whistleblower Center and everyone else who is in so much support of whistleblowers. And I wish to say welcome to the whistleblowers, allies, friends, and family members. I am Jane Turner, an FBI whistleblower, and I am delighted to welcome you to National Whistleblower Day 2020. This year is different due to coronavirus, and we still have not gotten our Rose Garden ceremony. But we are alive and kicking and have witnessed incredible events concerning whistleblowers. Events that have changed the politics, the perception, and direction of this country. Never say that your actions have not had an impact, because every whistleblower brings a little more light into a world yearning for the truth. No matter where you reside, your efforts to bring truth to light will be the light that starts a spark, which grows into a flame, which becomes an inferno. Each and every whistleblower has contributed to the moral universe. Whistleblowers build on the whistleblowers before them, in case law, in support, and in number. You will never be alone. You will never be forgotten. We will not back down. We will not be cowed. And we will not despair. I know it sometimes feels like others are building on our bones, and we want to do something for whistleblowers today. Contact me and we will get your story out there with links to your media presence or crowdfunding. Again, you are not alone and you are not forgotten. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Lorenzo Davis. Lorenzo spent 23 years in the Chicago Police Department, got his law degree in 1991, and retired from the force in 2004. He joined the Independent Police Review Authority, which reviewed allegations of police misconduct. Before Lorenzo, there had been 400 police shootings, 70 dead, and every one noted as justified. Lorenzo found cases that were unjustified, but his supervisor commanded him to change the unjustified to justified. Lorenzo believed in doing what was right, what was fair, and what was just. He refused to change the designation and was forced to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, Lorenzo Davis Esq. Lorenzo, glad to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I was looking for my picture. Okay.
Go ahead, Lorenzo.
Okay, I'm glad to be here. I wanted to mention that there have been more police officer involved shootings going back a number of years, hundreds of them as a matter of fact. That 400 figure that you mentioned was those civilians who were shot during the time that I worked at the Independent Police Review Authority. It had replaced the old Office of Professional Standards, which have failed to hold police officers accountable for excessive force or, say, non-justified shootings. They came up with the Independent Police Review Authority, which was created in 2007. I joined the IPRA, as we call it, in 2008. And from the time I was there, from 2008 to there were over 400 officer involved shootings and over 70 of those individuals were killed. Now, from 2008, I began to notice that, of course, some of these shootings were very questionable before I actually investigated them. I was on what they call the Major Incident Response Team, where I went out to officer involved shootings and other excessive force incidents. And I noticed some really troubling shootings at that time. Finally, I was assigned to excessive force cases and officer involved shootings, and I resolved to do what was right, what was just, and call it like I saw it. My investigations led to me to conclude that some of these officer involved shootings were not justified, and I said so. At the same time that I began to say investigate these shootings, technology was improved drastically. In addition to what we call police observation devices on poles, telephone poles and the like, you had dash cam cameras on squad cars. And even today you have police officers wearing body cameras. At the same time, society changed and that almost everyone has a cell phone today that can take pictures or video. Now, observing those videos, you can see, and everyone can see now, is very transparent that police officers are engaging in excessive force, and some of these officer-involved shootings are, I hate to say it, they're murders. Some of them are murders. I had not a problem while I was at the Independent Police Review Authority and reaching the actual conclusions that some of these shootings were not justified. I was promoted to supervisor and had a team of 6 in 2010. But then in 2012, we got a new chief administrator. And I felt perhaps he must have had a hidden agenda because he decided that no officer-involved shooting was not justified. They were all justified. And he engaged in various practices, including ordering me to change conclusions that I had reached on shootings, deciding that they were not justified to justified, which I refused to do. And ultimately what occurred was I was given a direct order to change the findings on one particular case, and I refused to do that. I was told that I better had it changed by the following day. And what I did was I took off a few days to think about it, and I came back and simply added one line to that particular case. The case read, all of the evidence showed that the shooting was not justified. And my analysis and my conclusion was that it was not justified. But then I added a line to say that the first deputy chief decided it is justified and turned it in. They considered, the chief administrator considered me to be a smart aleck at the time. And conditions went from bad to worse. I got a performance evaluation after over 2 years of not getting one. My previous one was excellent by the chief administrator when he was the first deputy chief administrator. But he decided that to give me a marginal rating, and I challenged that and wrote asking for a review. And the performance rating that he gave me listed a number of cases, excessive force cases and officer-involved shooting cases that I had determined were sustained or not justified shootings. And the performance rating said that because of that, because I had made them not sustained, or rather not sustained and or not justified, it was determined that my performance rating would be lowered. I refuted that. I was asked to come into the office one day soon after that, to go over my review that I had written, and I was handing a letter which said I was terminated, and I was walked out of the office.
Lorenzo, may I ask you, while you were working at IPRA, you took time off to think about the implications of following the new administrator's orders to change cases from unjustified to justified. What was the turning point for you in your decision to not change those reports?
And I'm going to have to ask you to keep the answer pretty brief because we have Representative Speier ready to go. She's got a vote coming up, and so we're going to have to move really fast on this. Thanks.
Okay, I never had any intention of ever changing my conclusions.
Okay. And what changes made?
Those few days that I took off, I simply thought about what would occur if I was considered to be insubordinate. And, I decided that I would run the risk.
What lessons do you think the police departments can learn from your case, Lorenzo?
Now every case is much more transparent than it is now, and police departments must hold police officers accountable. You can't cover these things up anymore, as we have seen lately with all of the demonstrations all over America.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And his full interview will be on Frontline Whistleblower News this Friday. Thank you so much. And back to John.
Thank you, Jane and Lorenzo. So I now have the great pleasure of introducing Representative Jackie Speier from California. Representative Speier is a fearless fighter for women's equality, LGBTQ rights, and the disenfranchised. She has dedicated her life to eliminating government corruption while working to strengthen America's national and economic security. As co-chair of the House Whistleblower Protection Caucus, we know we can count on her to fight for whistleblowers, no matter what the obstacles. Right now, as she'll explain, she is playing a leading role in fighting for better protection for those who expose wrongdoing in the COVID-19 response. So please send your questions over the chat box. I know that Congresswoman would like to hear from you. Let's now turn it over to Representative Speier.
Thank you, John, and thanks to Lorenzo for his courage and for being a hero. You know, today, the House of Representatives is mourning the passing of one of our great heroes, John Lewis, who is whose funeral is being held in Atlanta, Georgia. And what most whistleblowers do is do what John Lewis did: follow the truth, move forward, cross that bridge when he knew he was going to be arrested because he was going to do the right thing. Today, as we all know, is National Whistleblowers Day, and it is something to celebrate, but it's also something to observe that we still need more protections for whistleblowers in this country. I'm reminded of how whistleblowers first came to be in this country. It dates back to the Continental Congress, when the first whistleblower protection bill was passed in 1778. And what led to the passage were actions, again, by two heroes. In 1777, they were two naval officers, Samuel Shaw and Richard Maven, who revealed that British POWs were being tortured by the commander-in-chief of the Continental Navy. When they blew the whistle, they were, in fact, charged with criminal libel and imprisoned. But they did what I think whistleblowers often do, is they petitioned, and they petitioned the Continental Congress, and the Continental Congress unanimously passed the very first whistleblower protection law. And what they did at the same time was release all the documents associated with the allegations, which for all intents and purposes was the first automatic FOIA that had been created, but it took us, what, centuries to recognize the importance of doing that with everything. So the Continental Congress also voted to pay for the defense of those two soldiers, and they ended up paying a whopping $1,418 for their defense, and they were both found not guilty. As evidenced by Shaw and Maven's story, whistleblowers are moral compasses. Just like John Lewis has been a moral compass for the Congress of the United States. And in these very difficult times, too often, we see retaliation and retribution for whistleblowers. So any whistleblower who has that moral compass has to think twice. Do I really want to do this? And face what may come to me. The biggest beneficiary, as we know, of whistleblowers are the American people, are the taxpayers. We've already seen whistleblowers shine the spotlight on truth in COVID-19. And in part, that is why this legislation that I have introduced along with my colleague Jamie Reskin and my colleague Ms. Harris is an effort to recognize that there are going to be bad actors. There are going to be people trying to take advantage of this horrific pandemic. They are going to try and fleece the taxpayers of whatever money they can, and we've already seen it. It came to my attention that a company called Filikit was formed merely 6 days before receiving a federal contract for $10 million to provide COVID-19 testing supplies. Now, it was a whistleblower within that company that came forward and said, these are being prepared in unsanitary conditions, and created some oversight and accountability. There was also a Florida man who got a PPP loan for $4 million. And you know what he did with that loan? He bought himself a Lamborghini and went on a shopping spree. So the other issues that we're finding with Paycheck Protection Program is that LLCs that are being identified as separate businesses when in fact they're all run by the same person. One is a company called Vibra Healthcare, a chain of hospitals and therapy centers with an annual revenue stream of $1 billion. And they received as much as $97 million in federal funds in the Paycheck Protection Program that was specified for small businesses. And they did that by applying as 26 separate LLCs, limited liability companies. 23 of the loans came from the same bank, and almost all of the approvals happened on the very same day in April. So with trillions, truly trillions of dollars of taxpayer money, more money than we actually appropriate every year, we're spending it in months. And the opportunity for fraud and abuse is great, and that's why I have introduced the COVID-19 Whistleblower Protection Act, so that persons who work for companies would have the same kinds of protections that individuals who work for the federal government have. So I'm hopeful that we will get this passed. It will guarantee that they have access to jury trials, administrative relief, and that their identities will be protected. Now, having said that, I can't begin to tell you how deeply troubled I have been by this president in his egregious conduct in taking out whistleblowers. Whether it's Michael Atkinson, who is the Inspector General for the Intelligence Agency and who followed the letter of the law, someone who had been a U.S. attorney and worked in the Department of Justice for his entire career till he became the Inspector General, who was a Republican himself. But because he followed the law and pursued the whistleblowers' allegations and found that they were both urgent and material, he lost his job as Inspector General. And then, of course, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who also came forward and who was unceremoniously taken from the White House and has decided now to retire because his promotion was in jeopardy. Rick Brightspate, the great leader in the program that looks at all of the pandemic and medical needs, had said that if we don't do a national coordinated response to COVID-19 this year, that we will have the darkest winter in modern history. And we are on that path because persons with integrity, with intelligence, with skills, with expertise are not being listened to. So, having said all that, I don't want to discourage anyone from becoming a whistleblower. If I did nothing else in my life but could say that I blew the whistle on some form of fraud or abuse, I will feel that I have done something for my country, and I hope every whistleblower feels like that. I and so many here in Congress want to protect you. We want to make sure the laws are stronger. We're trying to do that right now in the reauthorization of the Intelligence Act. And I, for one, won't support anything that doesn't make changes to that act so that persons like Inspector General Atkinson would be protected in the future. So with that, John, I will complete my comments and welcome your questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So many important points you made, and I'm going to apologize. We have Senator Grassley coming on at 12:30, or bottom of the hour for people that are not in this time zone. And so what I'd like to do is see if I can combine a few of the questions that have come across on the screen. There's a lot of people quite concerned about the fate of whistleblowers in the past year, as essentially whistleblowers got caught up in partisan warfare, and they were just doing their duty. And so a lot of people want to know, is there a way to restore the long history of bipartisan support for whistleblowers that we have enjoyed for most of our history? I know we have Senator Grassley coming on the line, but are you getting any signals of warmth or support from any of your members across the aisle on the House side?
Well, there are members on the Republican side of the aisle that recognize the great value that whistleblowers provide. I mean, there's no greater Republican ally and advocate for whistleblowers than the senator. And I think when all the dust settles after this election, hopefully we can come together, and I would hope that I could work with the senator in doing something that really plugs the holes that have been abused, and make sure that we have a whistleblower protection law that's airtight, so that future whistleblowers won't be subject to this kind of gross conduct.
All right, my final question: how can we in the whistleblower community help you, especially this moment you have to better protect COVID-19 whistleblowers? What can we be doing to help?
Well, I think part of what you can do is spread the word. Encourage your family and friends across the country to support the bill, co-sponsor the bill. We truly want to see this protection put in place because there's so much money at stake, and there are just bad actors out there, regrettably, and they need to be called to task. So we want to make sure that people feel that we have their back. So that would be number one. Send me your whistleblower concerns. If you have recommendations on how we can tighten the laws, I'm all ears because I feel so strongly about this issue. I've worked on this issue for my entire career in government, and I know that we can do so much good by having your eyes and ears on the ground, identifying when there is waste, fraud, and abuse so that we can rid ourselves of it.
Congresswoman, I cannot thank you enough for joining us here today, and most importantly for your leadership in the House of Representatives for the cause of whistleblowing. We know there's a lot of work left to be done, and we're looking forward to continuing and strengthening our partnership.
Thank you. It's great being with you.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn over the proceedings to Dean Zerbe. Dean Zerbe is a senior policy analyst at the National Whistleblower Center and a partner at the Zerbe Miller Finger law firm, where he is a fierce advocate for whistleblowers. From 2006 to 2008, Dean served as counsel and tax counsel for the Senate Finance Committee for then Chairman Charles Grassley. Dean, all yours.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it, and I am so thrilled to see the senator. Great to see you, Senator. I'm going to just do a quick introduction for you. I would just say it's probably the greatest of my honors to be able to introduce my longtime boss, Senator Charles E. Grassley. He is truly the patron saint of whistleblowers. He believes in whistleblowers in his bones. He thinks they are just so vital in terms of government oversight, government accountability, and protecting taxpayer dollars. And that goes regardless of who is in power. He is out there advocating for the whistleblowers. And I think, Senator, that makes you a little bit like the skunks at the picnic that you want to talk about the whistleblowers. Sometimes you're not that popular for them. But he has done his support for whistleblowers not only with words, but also deeds. His fingerprints are on every single major piece of legislation protecting whistleblowers or providing whistleblowers rewards for coming forward, including, of course, the False Claims Act has brought in $60 billion. He also authored the tax whistleblower law, which has basically broken the banks in Switzerland, the SEC whistleblower law. It goes on and on. Basically, every single law out there is, you can thank the Senator Grassley for making happen. So, Senator, I apologize. I'm sure if we were in front of an audience, they'd all be cheering and standing for you and your great work, but you can know in your heart that they're doing that. And I will turn it over to you, Senator. They want to hear your good words. Senator, you might be on mute. I'm sorry.
You're right, I am on mute.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I got comments, but I want to, first of all, thank the center for the support that you give us. Thanks to each individual or group of individuals that are patriotic citizens and let us know what's wrong in government or even in the private sector. And also to comment on this form of communication with you, because I feel more comfortable being face to face with you. And if you were here, there'd be a few hundred people, and I understand there's a few thousand people on here now. So I hate to say that there might be something good coming out of the virus pandemic, but I found that these modern methods of communication, which have been around for 20 years, so they aren't so modern, they give us an opportunity to communicate with a lot more people. So thanks to the thousands of people that are interested in this and for the good work you do. So I'm glad to talk about some whistleblower legislation. I've been working on this and it's very crucial in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most recently, I've been working on legislation to strengthen the False Claims Act. The massive increase in government funding to address the COVID-19 crisis has created new opportunities for fraudsters trying to cheat the government and steal hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And you heard from some of that from the Congresswoman. Ironically, at a time when it's important to encourage whistleblowers to come forward so that we can recover stolen funds, the Justice Department has been continuing its recent practice of dismissing charges in many of the False Claims Act cases brought by whistleblowers before stating its reasons. And of course, that's simply not right. If there are serious allegations of fraud, no less than the Attorney General should state the legitimate reasons for deciding not to pursue them in court. This gets to a point where Dean has heard me use these phrases so much. There needs to be transparency in government. So these decisions ought to be transparent, because with transparency brings accountability. My legislation clarifies ambiguities created by the courts and reins in this practice that undermines the purpose of my 1986 amendments to the False Claims Act, which of course was to empower you whistleblowers. During the pandemic, there's also been a dramatic increase in whistleblower complaints filed with the Security and Exchange Commission. Whistleblowers have been calling attention to sham artists peddling counterfeit and substandard medical goods and phony cures to consumers. The Whistleblower Program Improvement Act is what I call it. And I introduced it last year, strengthened protections for the Security Exchange Commission and Commodity Future Trading Commission whistleblowers. It requires the SEC and the CFTC to make timely decisions regarding whistleblower rewards. This is another way of encouraging whistleblowers so you don't get extended and never get an answer. If you want to encourage whistleblowing, you got to let them know that the government is acting on it. We're now waiting, of course, for the Senate Banking Committee to sign off on the SEC portion of the bill, which the Security and Exchange Commission supports. And by the way, I just had a meeting with the chairman of the Security and Exchange Commission, and he has taken to heart over the last year and even listened to whistleblowers some of the things that I found fault with the Security and Exchange Commission not supporting whistleblowers and getting awards and proper awards out timely. And I think he has met my, has delivered on the suggestions that I've given him. Finally, we've been having a national conversation lately about the role of law enforcement in our society. Law enforcement officials are there to protect the constitutional rights of our citizens and to never do harm or infringe upon those constitutional rights that each of us have under the Constitution. Whenever the Attorney General has cause to believe law enforcement is infringing on those rights, he has the authority to pursue legal action. But the Attorney General can't prosecute what he doesn't know about. That's why I've been working on legislation that would ensure law enforcement whistleblowers who report violations of American constitutional rights. These protections are more important now than ever. As you know, we've been talking about police now since Mr. Ford's murder. But Congress needs to pick up the pace in order to pass the legislation and the other whistleblower bills that I mentioned before this session comes to an end, which probably will be Christmas this year. In coming months, I'll be working hard to see that these bills are, and as I do, I would appreciate your continued support, and I know you're enthusiastic behind what I'm trying to do. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you, Senator. That is, I'm out of breath. That's quite a laundry list of things you're going to have on your plate to accomplish. But I know I have great faith that if anyone can do it, you can. We have a few questions that we got. Some of them you kind of touched on already, Senator, but maybe a few points for you to elaborate on. What are your thoughts on government contractors claiming they are not responsible for fraud if some government official, however corrupt, had knowledge of the fraud? Maybe this is something in your False Claims Act reform.
Yeah. Well, lower courts have completely misconstrued dicta opinion by a Supreme Court and read into the law a materiality standard that is not consistent with the actual language of our law. This improper reading has hamstrung the law at a time when the government is spending unprecedented amounts combating the pandemic that we're in. It's critical that Congress shore up the False Claims Act to ensure that it's properly equipped to handle any potential COVID-related fraud. And by the way, Dean, I think at the beginning I forgot to thank you for not only your loyalty to me, but what you've done to bring in a lot of money through legislation you worked on when I was chairman of the committee, and you helped me get passed. I appreciate that very much, and everybody listening ought to appreciate what Dean Zerbe has done to help the taxpayers.
That's very kind of you, Senator. You're the one that makes it all possible, though. It's you're the engine that drives it. But very kind. Another question for you, again, kind of on this False Claims Act provision that you've talked about. What are your thoughts? And you touched on it, but maybe elaborate on the government's recent initiatives to dismiss the cases of False Claims Act whistleblowers without giving them an opportunity to be heard. It seems like it's kind of your old chestnut about saying, well, from the Bible, rather, but you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set ye free. Tell me a little bit your thinking on that issue.
I spoke to a longer extent on this point that I would tell people within the last hour on the floor, is we always use July 30th as National Whistleblower Day because it's the same day that the Continental Congress enacted the first whistleblower law. And so it's got a big history, even before we were a country. At least the principle has had. And it works this way, that a relator goes in and says something's wrong. He hopes to get the federal government, the Justice Department, to help him, because if you got the government working with a whistleblower, there's brings more muscle behind it, probably saves the whistleblower some time and money as well, and protects the whistleblower it ought to protect the whistleblower to a greater extent. So then some of these lay around a long time, so they don't get acted upon. That discourages whistleblowers. If you say something's wrong and it takes a long time for the government to say, yes, we like this one. If they don't like it, then presumably the relator ought to be able to go ahead on his own. But if the Justice Department dismisses it, that hurts the case for the relator going on his own. And so maybe nothing's done to correct a wrong. So I don't say what the Justice Department is doing is wrong, but it's how they're doing it, and they're doing more of it now than ever before. And the very least, transparency brings accountability. It's the second time I've said that to you. So they ought to at least say why they're dismissing it, and if they are going to dismiss it, to notify the citizen that has come in and let the citizen argue the other point of view. But right now, it's a one-sided deal. Unfair to the taxpayer, unfair to the relator.
That's perfect, Senator. Well, Senator, I know we've got to be mindful of your time and schedule. You've been so good. I just leave you with one last thought. You don't need to answer to it, but I know you've been doing great work you constantly fine-tune your efforts on the SEC and the False Claims Act. I think are right on mark. We need to get those. And I just encourage you too. We've talked about in the past, the National Whistleblower Center sent you a letter. Needs to be some fine-tuning on the great tax whistleblower law that you wrote as well too. And I know that's in your mind, but I hope encourage you to take a hard look at that as well.
Well, thank you, and I will.
You bet. Senator, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Godspeed. Thank you.
So I really think it's fantastic news. Thank you, Dean. Senator, I don't know if everyone realized the significance of what Senator Grassley said, but he sounded like he's cautiously optimistic we can get some strength in the amendments to the False Claims Act this year. With his leadership, that would be quite an achievement. So, Dean, I really appreciate your moderating this. We're now going to shift over to our next panel.